really been thinking and praying about what to do this morning. Of course, we've been going through the book of Ephesians, and there are times where a lesson I start in the morning ends up carrying over into the afternoon, right? And now, most of the time in the afternoon, I do something different. We go through Psalms or we do something like that. But every once in a while, something I do in the morning carries over into the afternoon. Well, today, we're going to flip that on its head a little bit. And the psalm that we would have covered or will cover tonight, I want to actually talk about a story that I think goes along very well with that psalm this morning. So we're flipping it around. This afternoon's message is actually going to come over into this morning's message. So the psalm that we're going to cover this afternoon, I'll go ahead and read it to you. It is in Psalms chapter 76. Psalms chapter 76. And it is described as a psalm of Asaph. And in verse 1 it says, "In Judah is God known. His name is great in Israel. In Salem," that'd be in, really this is dealing kind of with Jerusalem. "In Salem also is his tabernacle and his dwelling place in Zion. There brake he the arrows of the bow, the shield, and the sword, and the battle. Selah. Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey. The stout-hearted are spoiled. They have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands. At thy rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and horse are cast into a dead sleep. Thou, even thou, art to be feared, and who may stand in thy sight when once thou art angry? Thou didst cause judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still. When God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth, Selah. Surely the wrath of man shall praise thee. The remainder of wrath shalt thou restrain. Vow and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about him bring presents unto him that ought to be feared. He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth." Now, we're not going to start preaching Psalms chapter 76, but you can tell there that that is a chapter dealing with God's power and dealing with God overthrowing kings and God being the ultimate judge and the deliverer of his people, right? At a very high level, that's what that chapter seems to be talking about. Now, that reminds me of several things, and there's a lot of discussion when you look at commentaries about what specifically was this psalm written about. Was it one of the victories of David? Was it one of the victories of one of the other kings? Was it the victory that Hezekiah saw over the Assyrians? Is it dealing with the final battle at the end of this world, the battle of Gog and Magog? There's a lot of discussion, right? And I have my opinions, which is part of why we're going to cover something else this morning that I think is related to this chapter. But listen, as we went through the Psalms, it doesn't have to just be one instance. This psalm may not just be dealing with one instance. It is a good example for us to think about the power of God and what he does for his people, right? And there's multiple instances in the Bible where you can talk about God providing great deliverance. Now, as we think about the story I want to convey, you can take your Bibles and turn to Isaiah chapter 36. It's interesting, these two chapters are really almost repeated word for word in the Bible. You can also find them in 2 Kings, I think it's chapter 18 and 19. It's really about the same story. And this deals with Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, who, by the way, this is one of my favorite Old Testament stories. It's going to be a lot of reading because it is 2 chapters. But what I love about this section of Scripture is Hezekiah has a problem. He's in trouble. And what he does is he comes and he literally lays his problems at the Lord's feet, right? And so today, as we think about titles, the title for this message might be something like Laying Your Troubles Before the Lord, right? Or something like that. This is the idea of when you're overwhelmed and you've got something bearing down on you. Take those things in faith and trust, because I think you'll see that's what Hezekiah does. Take those things in faith and trust and give them to the Lord, right? Give them to the Lord, knowing that He is in full control. All right, Isaiah chapter 36. It says in verse 1, and again, bear with us as we have a lot of reading. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Syria, came up against all the defenced cities of Judah and took them. Assyria comes against the fenced cities of Judah, and he's winning. Right? The king is winning. The king of Assyria is winning. It says that he takes the fenced cities. It says in verse 2, And the king of Assyria sent Rabshakeh from Lachish to Jerusalem unto King Hezekiah with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. Then came forth unto him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son, which was over the house, and Shebaniah the scribe, and Joah the Asaph's son, the recorder. And Rabshakeh said unto him, Say ye unto Hezekiah, Thus saith the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is there within wherein thou trustest? Now imagine this, if you will. You are in the city of Jerusalem. The king Hezekiah is in the city of Jerusalem. It's the fenced city. By the way, it is the most defended city in Judah. It's the most important city in Judah. The second most defended city and important city in Judah at the time was Lachish, which we just mentioned. And what happened to it? It's been defeated. The Assyrian army has besieged it and overtaken it, along with all of the other fenced cities in Judah. You know what that means? Judah's losing, and losing bad. This is like the last stronghold. And by the way, the Assyrian army at the time, very powerful. Very powerful. Multiple kingdoms in the area pay tribute to the Assyrians. Another little tidbit here. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, his city that he has built up the defenses of and made even bigger than it already was, is a city by the name of Nineveh. You guys remember the city of Nineveh? Jonah went there, right? And Jonah preached repentance to that city, right? That's the city of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. But now Jerusalem, which is the center and the capital of Judah, is surrounded by a mighty army. And it's actually being what we call besieged. Now, besieged literally means, especially for the younger ones here, if you think about a besieged city, it is surrounded. You can't get in and you can't get out. You aren't going anywhere. If you didn't leave town before the Assyrian army got there, it's too late. And you know what's happened to every other city? It's been attacked. It's been defeated. Many people slaughtered. Everybody that's not slaughtered has been taken away as captive out of the land. By the way, by this time, Israel and Judah have already kind of split, right, as two different kingdoms. Not only has most of the cities of Judah fallen, the capital of Israel fell years ago to the Assyrians. The nation of Israel has already been taken into captivity at this point. Judah's left, and it isn't looking good for Judah. And now this messenger has been sent out, and he's declaring a message to them. And his first question to them is, what are you trusting in? Where's your confidence? You see this army back here? What right do you have to have any confidence or trust in anything? You are about to be conquered. He says in verse 5, I say, sayest thou, but they are but vain words. I have counsel and strength for war. Now on whom dost thou trust, that thou rebellest against me? Lo, thou trustest in the staff of this broken reed on Egypt, wherein if any man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all that trust in him. He says, listen, if you are trusting in your alliance with the king of Egypt, if you are relying on Pharaoh to deliver you, he's not going to. Matter of fact, your faith and trust in him is misplaced. It would be like leaning on a cane for support, and that cane breaks and your hand goes down into the wood. That's what leaning on Pharaoh is like, right? He says, if that's what you're trusting in, don't. Oh, by the way, a little bit of history here. Israel, the one that's already been conquered completely and taken into captivity, do you know who they called on for their defense? Egypt. It didn't work. I think that's part of what he's saying here. Oh, you're going to try to do that like they did? It's not going to work. But he goes on and he even gets more personal to them. He says in verse 7, but if thou say to me, we trust in the Lord our God. Now that word Lord there is all caps, meaning Jehovah. Listen, this pagan Assyrian king is standing outside their capital city where the temple of God is, and he says, are you trusting in Jehovah? You understand, this guy knew enough about Israel, Judah, and the nation to know what they called their God. He said, are you trusting in this one you call Jehovah? Are you trusting in this invisible God? He says, it is not he. Is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah hath taken away, and said to Judah and to Jerusalem, ye shall worship before this altar? Now, he didn't know as much as he thought he did. Hezekiah did tear down the high places. He did tear down the altars. He did tear down the groves. But Hezekiah was doing that because the people of Israel had stopped serving God like they were supposed to. Now this pagan king looked at it and said, well, isn't this same God, the God that Hezekiah has been tearing down all this stuff and saying you only have to worship here? Well, now I'm here. Your last stronghold, the place where supposedly your God actually dwells. He says in verse 8, now therefore give pledges, I pray thee, to my master the king of Assyria, and I will give thee 2,000 horses, if thou be able on thy part to set riders upon them. Hey, I'll even give you horses if you even got enough men to put on them. How then wilt thou turn away the face of one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put thy trust on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? I have the power. I have the army. I have the supplies. I'm the one that's mighty here. How dare you think you can trust and lean on somebody else? And with the things that you would get, do you think you could even turn away one of my captains? He's declaring just how much greater he is than all of them together. He says in verse 10, and am I now come up without the Lord against this land to destroy it? The Lord said unto me, go up against this land and destroy it. You know what he said? He is literally saying, is it Jehovah that you're trusting in? Well, Jehovah told me to come and destroy this land. So he's not only saying you can't trust in Jehovah, he's trying to tell them it's your Jehovah that sent me to destroy you. In verse 11, then said Eliakim and Shebaniah and Joah unto Rabishaketh, speak, I pray thee, unto thy servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it, and speak not to us in the Jewish language, in the ears of the people that are on the wall. They're like, because obviously at this point, this Assyrian messenger is speaking in Hebrew, and everybody can hear what he's saying. And the messengers, the Jewish messengers, ask him, hey, we understand Assyrian. You don't have to speak. You don't have to speak in our language. Speak in yours if it's. We understand. You know why they wanted that? They didn't want the people to hear the things that were being said. It's demoralizing. You understand that in wartime, there's propaganda and there's other things that are done, right? And it's demoralizing. Well, that's what's happening. He wants the people to hear what he's saying. He wants them to hear it. And his answer in verse 12, but Rabishaketh saith, hath my master sent me to thy master, and to thee to speak these words? Hath he not sent me to the men that sit upon the wall, that they may eat their own dung and drink their own piss with you? Then Rabishaketh stood and cried with a loud voice in the Jews' language, and said, hear ye the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. It didn't work. He said, who are you to be telling me what language to use? Did you ask for me to come? No. I came at the bidding of my master. I'm going to do what I want to do. And by the way, he just seems to speak even louder. And now he actually calls out to the people directly, saying, listen to what the king of Assyria has to say. He says in verse 14, thus saith the king, let not Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you. Neither let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria. For the people to hear, he says, don't let the king deceive you. He is going to tell you it's going to be okay. He's going to tell you that our God will protect us. He's going to tell you that Jehovah will deliver you. I'm here to tell you that that is a lie. Now, by the way, do you know what was going on behind those fenced cities? Hezekiah was telling the people, trust in the Lord. The Lord is with us. The Lord's going to protect us. This messenger knew what the defense would be, and he was trying to attack that defense. He goes on, and he gets into a little bit more detail. He says in verse 16, hearken not to Hezekiah, for thus saith the king of Assyria, make an agreement with me by a present, and come out to me, and eat ye every one of his vine, and every one of his fig tree, and drink ye every one the waters of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Beware lest Hezekiah persuade you, saying, the Lord will deliver us. Hath any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arphad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? And have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who are they among all the gods of these lands that have delivered their land out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? Behold, they held their peace and answered him not a word, for the king's commandment was saying, answer him not. So, what he declares is, I know the king is behind that fence telling you right now to trust in your God, to trust in Jehovah. But I want you to think about, in all the surrounding area, you've heard of all of the cities and the kingdoms that have fallen at my hand. Don't you think those places worshiped gods? Don't you think those places believed their gods were going to deliver them? But they didn't. Why do you think your God will? I have been," and what he's declaring here, "I have been more mighty than any God so far." He's saying gods cannot stand before me. Yours won't either. Now, Hezekiah's messengers don't answer him, but it says in verse 22, "Then came Eliakim the son of Hilkiah that was over the household, and Shebaniah the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder to Hezekiah with their clothes rent, and told him the words of Rabshakeh." And then you get into verse 37. "And it came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebaniah the scribe, and the elders of the priests, and covered with sackcloth, unto Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos." He went into the house of the Lord. He starts to pray. He's in sackcloth and ashes. It's a sign of mourning. It's a sign of great distress. And he sends messengers to Isaiah the prophet. And they ask Isaiah what they should do. It says in verse 3, "And they said unto him," that's Isaiah, "Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble and of rebuke and of blasphemy before the children are come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth." He gives this picture of a woman that's in labor trying to deliver a baby, but there's no strength there. The delivery's not happening. The delivery won't come. The mother and the baby are in distress. And there's no hope, it seems. He uses that as an example to show the distress that the city of Jerusalem is in right now. It says in verse 4, "And it may be the Lord thy God will hear the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master has sent to reproach the living God, and will reprove the words which the Lord thy God hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that is left." Listen, there's been a lot of destruction already. There's been a lot of people that have already fallen in death or in captivity. And he describes Jerusalem as being the remnant. And he sends to Isaiah and he lays out the problem. And he asks Isaiah to pray to the Lord about what to do. And listen, it's interesting. What Hezekiah notes and what Hezekiah seems to take the most focus on is the blasphemy that's occurred against Jehovah. He says, listen, this king is literally claiming that he's from you. This king is literally claiming that you couldn't defend us. This king is claiming that he is stronger than any other god, and why would you be any stronger than him? That's blasphemy. And Hezekiah says and pleads for the Lord to hear that his name is being reproached, and praying that Lord would intervene. In verse 5, "So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, and Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say unto your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria has blasphemed me." Now listen, you're in the city. You're surrounded by one of the most powerful nations in the world at the time that has conquered Israel already, that has overthrown every city that they've came to in Judah. Excuse me. And the prophet's words are, don't be afraid. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. God heard him. God knows. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Verse 7, "Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumor, and return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land." Now that's really, really specific. I'm going to cause the thing to happen, and he's going to hear some rumors, and he's going to rush home. Oh, and by the way, while he's home, I will cause him to fall by his own sword. It says in verse 8, "So Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he had heard that he was departed from Lachish. And he had heard, saying concerning Tirhakah, the king of Ethiopia, he has come forth to make war with thee. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah, saying, and I'm going to pause there for a second. It's almost like, as they hear from Isaiah, don't worry, I'm going to send a rumor, and he's going to go fight some other thing that he's got to deal with. And while he's there, I'm going to cause him to be slain by his own sword. All that's happening while Rabshakeh is going back. That's the messenger. He's going back. He finds out that the king has heard about something else, and now there's multiple things going on. And the king seems to be already making plans and arrangements to be somewhere else and to go back home and to deal with this other problem. Now that doesn't mean that the armies, by the way, does not mean that the armies surrounding Jerusalem suddenly disappeared. But something else is happening, and the king's attention is drawn away as he goes back to deal with something else. It says in verse 10, this is the message. They're not ready to be done with Jerusalem, by the way, right? There's this other thing they're going to deal with. But in one final push to convince Jerusalem that their battle is about to be over, he says this, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, let not thy God, in whom thou hast trusted, deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given unto the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, thou hast heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands by destroying them utterly, and shalt thou be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them which my fathers have destroyed, as Gozan and Haran and Rethaph, and the children of Eden which were in Telazar? Where is the king of Hamath, and the king of Arphad, and the king of the city of Zepharim, Hena and Iva? So he lays out again. He's already shouted a lot of this to the people. Now he writes a letter specifically to the king, and he tells the king, the one that you've been trusting in, this God that you serve, you better not trust him. Don't expect him to deliver you, because he's not going to. And then he goes out and he lists out all of these other things, right? And he says, what about this king? And what about this king? And what about this king? And what about this king? What about this king? Hezekiah, it's hopeless for you. You got nothing left to trust in. You would be better off to just open the gates, come on out, and maybe I'll just take you away to this other land where you'll at least have something. In verse 14, and Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up unto the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. I love that. Literally, did he not just go pray to the Lord? But he went into the house of the Lord and he literally laid this letter out on the ground as he prayed to God. He said, here it is, Lord. Here's this letter. In verse 15, and Hezekiah prayed unto the Lord, saying, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, thou dwellest between the cherubims, thou art the God, even thou alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. Thou hast made heaven and earth. Incline thine ear, O Lord, and hear. Open thine eyes, O Lord, and see. And hear all the words of Sennacherib, which hath sent to reproach the living God. Of a truth, Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their countries, and have cast their gods into the fire. Therefore they have destroyed them. Now therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord, even thou only. Listen, even in this terrible time, Hezekiah still trusts God. He knows who his God is. He knows he serves the only living God. He knows he serves the God that literally made heaven and earth. And now, just like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where they understood the power of God was there to deliver them, they also understood God may not deliver them, but they were going to trust him regardless. And Hezekiah lays it out, and he says, I know who you are. I know the God that you are. I know you're able to deliver us. And Lord, this king has blasphemed your name. This king has basically said that he is above you and that you cannot protect us from him. That is a very public message that's been made. And he says, Lord, deliver us from him so that this world will know that you are God. That this man that claims that he can defeat any god can't defeat you. So now therefore, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that thou art the Lord, even thou only. It says in verse 21, Then Isaiah the son of Amos sent unto Hezekiah, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Whereas thou hast prayed to me against Sennacherib king of Assyria, this is the word which the Lord hath spoken concerning him. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice, and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. You know what the message to Sennacherib and his armies were? Who do you think you have blasphemed? Who do you think you are that you can speak about me that way? You think you can say those things about the Holy One of Israel? It says in verse 24, By thy servants hast thou reproached the Lord, and hast said, By the multitude of my chariots am I come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and I will cut down the tall cedars thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof, and I will enter into the height of his border, and the forest of his Carmel. I have digged and drunk water with the sole of my feet, have I dried up all the rivers of the besieged places. Hast thou not heard long ago how I have done it, and of ancient times that I have formed it? For now I have brought to the pass that thou shouldest be to lay waste defenced cities unto ruinous heaps. Therefore their inhabitants were of small power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field, and as the green herb, as the grass on the housetops, and as the corn blasted before it had grown up. But I know thy abode, and thy going out, and thy coming in, and thy rage against me. Because thy rage against me, and thy tumult is come up into mine ears, therefore will I put my hook in thy nose, and my bridle in thy lips, and I will turn thee back by the way which thou comest. And this shall be the sign unto thee. Ye shall eat this year such as groweth of itself, in the second year that which springeth the same. In the third year sow ye, and reap, and plant vineyards, and eat the fruit thereof. And the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward, and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and they that escape out of Mount Zion, the zeal of the Lord of hosts shall do this. Therefore thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, He shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it. But by the way that he came, by the same shall he return, and shall not come into this city. Thus saith the Lord, For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake, and for my servant's sake. Man, that is a powerful message. He says, do you know what? He says, this great king, the conquering and the things he's been able to do, he's been lifted up with the pride of those things. But what he needs to realize is that I am the one that allowed him to be able to do those things. I am the one that created the heavens and the earth. I am the one that raise up kings and take them down. I am the one that will look at him and say, oh, thou lifted up in pride. Man, I'm going to take you and lead you around by the ring in your nose. And don't you worry about it, Hezekiah. I'm going to send him back where he came from, the way he came. In other words, he's not going through Jerusalem. He's going to retreat back where he came from. And I'll take care of him. And I'll show him who the Lord Jehovah is, the one who he speaks of as being greater than. I'll show him. Man, there's just so much in here that you could get into. But again, it just goes into the idea that all of those other kingdoms, they were of great power. They were dismayed. They were confounded. But all of those things were only possible because God allowed them to happen. And he goes out and he says that there will be a remnant from Jerusalem. And I think it's important when we think about Psalm 76 to look here in verse 33 of Isaiah 37. He says, "Therefore saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow, nor come before it with shields, nor cast a bank against it." Psalm 76 verse 3, by the way, says, "There break he the arrows of the bow, the shield, and the sword in the battle." On the outskirts of Jerusalem, the Lord caused not an arrow to come into the city, not a shield to be used, not a sword to be used, and not a bank or a defense to come up against the walls. It says in verse 38, or verse 37, well, sorry, I'm getting too far ahead of myself. It says in verse 35, "For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake." Then the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So Sennacherib king of Assyria departed and went and returned and dwelt in Nineveh. And it came to pass, as he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch his god, that Adrammelech and Sharezer his sons smote him with the sword, and they escaped into the land of Armenia, and Esarhaddon his son reigned in his stead. Now there's two things that happen at the end of this story. One, Hezekiah and the people in Jerusalem didn't have to lift a finger. You know what? Night came. The Assyrian army went to sleep. The people at Jerusalem, I don't know whether they could sleep or not. But the next day, you know what they found? A lot of the stuff of the Assyrians was still there, but the Assyrians were dead. I mean, thousands and thousands of them. Now, Sennacherib had already started to hear about the rumors and the other things that he needed to go take care of. I think actually by the time this happened, he had probably already started to go back. But at this point, it's over. And whatever remnant is left, they turn tails and run back to Nineveh. The Lord, in one night, defeated the most powerful army of the time. And the king, in peace, back in Nineveh, is slain by the sword. His own kids. What was it the prophet Isaiah had said would happen to Sennacherib? That he would go back home, and that in his own home he would be slain by a sword. Every prophecy and every promise of God talked about in these two chapters took place. Now there's some types and shadows, I think personally, in these chapters that probably deal with some things yet to come. But the history of what went on here, it is so amazingly accurate. The prophecies, so detailed. And this is what happened. Now I only have a few minutes left. I'm going to tell you just a few things from a historical perspective, okay? From an archaeological perspective. And we may have to come back on some Sunday night or Wednesday night or sometime, maybe a Sunday school lesson, I don't know. We may have to come back and I'll show you a video and we'll talk about the archaeology associated with the city of Nineveh. And specifically, by the way, the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Have you guys seen, some of you maybe history buffs enough, or you've seen it? There's this little, I say little, but there's this octagonal shaped type stone, and on it is all of this writing. I think it's in one of the museums in Britain, one of the British museums. You know, when they first found that thing, nobody had any idea what it said. But over a period of many years, they were able to decipher the language and translate it. And do you know what part of that thing talks about? The battle between Sennacherib and Judah. Specifically mentions King Sennacherib. Specifically mentions King Hezekiah. Even talks about the fact that I have Hezekiah contained as a bird in a cage in Jerusalem. That was found in what is now known to be the city of Nineveh, which, by the way, in the 1800s, there was a lot of archaeology done there, a lot of stuff taken out. And what they found in one of the mounts that they dug up was a great hall, a great palace, so to speak, and in that palace was a great hall. And have you seen those statues where it's like a kind of like a horse with a man's head, right? Well, two of those things were mounted outside that great hall. And as you walk down this hall, it went from chamber to chamber, and it got back to this great room. And in this great room were all of these carvings on the wall. Imagine like that you had went to a museum and they had painted a mural that told a story, right? You've been to those places where it's showing like this timeline and, oh, this president was elected here, and then the war started, and then this happened, and you've kind of seen that at museums, right? Well, it's kind of like that. Well, do you know what a big front and center piece of this carvings on the wall was depicting? It depicted a great city, and they had these banks built up to above the walls so that they could go in and destroy the city. And over on this mountain was the king, and there was an inscription above it. You know what the inscription was describing? The destruction of the city of Lachish in Judah, which was what? The last fenced city that Sennacherib was able to actually defeat. Which city did he come after that? Jerusalem. So the question you should ask yourself is, why is this big hall, this great hall depicting the great victory, why is Jerusalem not front and center in this great hall? Well, because he didn't succeed. But he had succeeded in conquering the second greatest city in Judah. And by the way, the carvings on this wall, when they found the city of Lachish, do you know what? There was this great mound that when they dug under it were thousands and thousands and thousands of small stones that basically the armies would have thrown on the ground and packed down and then used that as a ramp to get up into the city. You know what this means? The very detailed description that you see in the Bible of a king's name who before, the city of Nineveh was uncovered was just a story in the Bible. But you know what archaeology shows? At the hands of the Assyrians, they described King Hezekiah being trapped in Jerusalem. They described the city of Lachish being destroyed. But it stopped there. And when you understand the Bible, you know why it stopped there. Because Lachish was the last city he defeated. Because the last thing he knew was Hezekiah was as a bird in a cage in Jerusalem. But back in his own palace, his own family killed him, and it went no further. The archaeological record, the historical record, and the biblical record all mesh. This is not just some story that was written to give us some great aspects of life and how we need to trust God. This was a historical event that truly happened. And you have to love Hezekiah's example of faith and trust in God. He told the people, God is with us. He prayed about it. He sought Isaiah the prophet's counsel. And when the final letter came, he went back into the house of God. He laid that before the Lord, and he prayed to God in faith and trust that God would deliver. And God did. And God did. Now, when we talk about Psalms chapter 76 tonight, and we spend a little bit more time in that, I want you to remember the story of Hezekiah as we think about Psalms chapter 76, okay? Now, at the end of that, I will give you another thing that Psalm 76 may be talking about. But I love this one as an example of God's power to deliver and what God does when the kings of this world think that they have become some great thing. God is in control. Thankful to know it's true. All right, we ask Brother Philip if he'd come and lead us in a song.